Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for the slight delay. Welcome to today's meeting of the Planning Committee. My name is Mike Johnson and I'm chair of the committee. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street, as at the Guildhall. This is a public meeting, and members of the public and press are permitted to report on proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording, and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. Those recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphones when speaking. So we move to the agenda. Appointment of substitutes.
We have Councillor Mrs. Lucy Hodgson for Councillor Alan Amos there. Thank you.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Councillor Barnes.
I did receive an email from a member of the parish council in regard to item 5. I did not respond to it, and I don't think it added any information that wasn't already on the papers.
Thank you for that. Any other declarations? Thank you. Public participation.
There's no public participation, Chair.
Thank you. Public representation.
Yes, there's public representation on item 5, which is the Ketchfield Broom Hallway. We have an objector, David Saunders. We have the applicant and agent from Rooftop Housing and from the RCA Generation, and local ward member, Councillor McKay.
Thank you. So we move straight to agenda item 5, which is indeed the Ketchfield. So if the speakers would like to come up to the table. And first, thank you.
Good morning. Hope you can hear me. Margaret did give me some brief tuition on this thing, so
Right.
forgive me if it fails.
We'll have the officer's presentation first. Okay.
Sorry?
We'll have the officer's presentation first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I start the presentation on this item, just to refer members' attention to the late paper that's been circulated in connection with this item. That includes for you representation from the Conservation Advisory Panel. I've also provided some further information for members in further discussions have been undertaken with the agents who are generally, well, they are happy with the conditions as recommended, but just to advise members, the list of the approved plans in condition 2 will require further revision to reflect the most up-to-date plans. And you will also note that there is a condition 37 regarding the public rights of way, because you'll note from the report there was an objection from the public rights of way team, and the public rights of way team have confirmed by email yesterday that they were happy for their concerns to be addressed through the provision of that condition, which is why it's added to you. And there will also be some just further ongoing discussions regarding conditions 35 and 36, which relate to the removal of permitted development rights. in terms of the plots where that might be more appropriate rather than others. And Councillor Agar, you asked me a question to clarify the number of basins within the site, going back to the League Local Flood Authorities comments, and there are 7 basins. So if we could start the presentation, please. Thank you. So what we have here is an application for full planning permission for 92 affordable dwellings with access, green infrastructure and associated works to facilitate that development. And so your report includes a description of the site and surrounding area, and I've tried to include a number of illustrative plans to accompany that. The main point to be taken from that is that the site is allocated for residential development within policy SWDP 45.1, and you'll note from further sections of the report that this planning committee has previously granted outline planning permission for the development of this site. That was for 81 dwellings, and that included provision for 40% affordable housing, and a Section 106 agreement was issued in that respect accordingly. If we could move on to the next slide, please. That's an aerial photograph where hopefully you can see the application site outlined in red. And then you have an intervening field between the 2 hedgerow boundaries across there. And hopefully you can see the annotation where that is part of a reserve matters application, which is referred to in the planning history of the site, where reserve matters consent as another part of the urban extension has been granted. So that field is separates this site from the closest point of the urban extension on this side of Taylor's Lane. And that photograph is quite useful because you can see that, again, reference to the planning history of the site. For many, many years, this site had been used for car boot sales. And again, that is detailed in the report for you. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. There's a series of photographs from the site from various points of view. Here we can see the very established conifer hedge adjacent to the Taylor's Lane boundary of the site in the background. And you can probably just about see the telecommunications mast just off centre to the left of that site photograph. If we could just go through these slides, we could just see various other aspects of the scheme. Again, coming along that conifer hedge, and again, wider distance across the site. These photographs show that, you know, it's in a generally flat site, has been in use, as I said, predominantly for car boot sales. There's a closer view of the telecommunications mast. And again, a wider view across the site to provide the context for it. And if we can move through those quite rapidly, we can always go back if members do want to go back. If we can stop on that one there. That is the proposed layout plan, and that's replicated in the report for you. And that shows you the general layout and configuration of the proposed dwellings. Points of note that within the central part of the site, that is where the proposed bungalows would be sited within either side of the central avenue. To the left-hand side, adjacent to Broomhall Way, is where the proposed 7 3-storey apartment buildings would be located, with the rest of the site 2-storey, 3 and 4 bedroom properties. And to the right-hand side, we can see the community orchard and the allotments and the attenuation pond or basin. If we can move on to the next set of slides, please. This is produced in the report for you, but that shows the proposed arrangements for access from Taylor Lane, and those are detailed in further detail in the report. But suffice to say, there will be footpath provision and crossings of the A38 as illustrated on that plan there. And the next slide, please. This is taken from the outline application for the Wellpick. It's no more than for illustrative purposes, but because obviously this scheme does need to link in with the wider access proposals as part of the overall urban extension, particularly along Taylor's Lane. So you can see that there are wider proposals for speed reductions along Taylor's Lane, and also closing off Taylor's Lane adjacent to the Norton Road end of Taylor's Lane to traffic, so it would be purely pedestrianised, and so therefore there would be pedestrian cycle linkage throughout the urban extension, and also providing access across the Broomhall Way to the recently constructed footbridge that's gone across there. So the next set of slides are floor plans and elevations of the various house types that are proposed, and we can perhaps go through these relatively rapidly. These are the bungalows that are proposed in the central portion. And the next ones, those are the apartment buildings. And then we have the range of the two-storey dwellings of the various bedroom sizes. Each of the dwellings is considered to have sufficient amenity space and spatial separation to meet our requirements set out in the residential design guide. And as you've read from the report, we have no concerns regarding future residents' amenities, nor indeed impact on neighbouring residents' amenities. We can just stop on that slide. That's a section through the site, so that you can see the relationship. And that is the proposed layout, which I believe is the last slide for you. So in terms of the, just some coloured illustrations just to help bring the layout to life. So I think if we end on that slide, which is the landscaping scheme, perhaps if we can leave that on for the time being. So in terms of the main issues, we can start by looking at the consultation responses that have been received, and we can see there have been considerable objection from neighbouring residents, and the areas of concern and objection are summarised for you in bullet form on page 13 and 14. And then we have the various other consultee responses that are again addressed in summary form, but clearly members will have had the opportunity to read those consultation responses in full. So together with the issues that are raised by the consultation responses, we've then set out in section 7 of the report what are considered to be the main issues raised by the proposals in terms of whether this represents a sustainable form of development when measured against the economic, social and environmental role. So in terms of the principle of development, as I've mentioned before and in the report, this is a site that's allocated as part of the South Worcester Urban Extension and has been the subject of a previous outline planning permission. And although that permission has now expired, the allocation for residential development of this site still remains. And we then look at the economic role in terms of provision of construction jobs for the initial period of construction, and also the ongoing benefits of a future population on the site, the local economy. In terms of the social role, first and foremost, this is a scheme for 92 affordable housings. It's all dwellings would be affordable, and that would be enshrined within a corresponding Section 106 agreement to ensure their delivery. The housing mix, we have the full range of 1, 2, 3 and 4 bed properties across the site. So in terms of housing mix, the scheme is considered acceptable in that regard. And referring members back to the late paper in terms of the density of development, that is considered acceptable also. I've alluded to, in terms of the environmental role, the residential amenity for future occupiers, which is considered again to be acceptable. And in your report on page 20, I've included the approved layout for that adjacent site to show that there is sufficient separation distance afforded both within the site, where you can see the attenuation feature, but also the intervening field before we actually get to this application site boundary. There are comments in there regarding public open space, sport and recreation through the community orchard, the allotments and the pond. We have a detailed response from the lead local flood authority in response to the issues we gave regarding flood risks and drainage, particularly those raised by Kempsey Parish Council. Comment regarding green infrastructure. There is a requirement that 40% of the site provide green infrastructure, and this site does achieve that requirement, particularly through the community allotments, orchard and open space. And you'll also see that there is a proposed 2.5 metre high bund that would contain the site partially along Broom Hallway and also the A38, as you can see on the layout plan in front of you, that would be further enhanced by additional proposed landscaping. In terms of the heritage assets, the site doesn't contain any heritage assets. It's not conservation area. There are no listed buildings. Nevertheless, it is adjacent to the battlefield site, and the impact of the proposed development is considered on pages 23, 24 and 25 in that respect, and also noting there is no change in the actual size of the site compared to the previous outline, where these previous aspects of the scheme were also considered acceptable. I would refer you to the map on the top of page 25 of your report, because you'll note from some of the objections that have been received, it's about the intervisibility between. Okay, paragraph 7.39. That is the that was the plan that was approved by the planning committee for the previous outline consent, and you can see on that there are I think some 21 plots that were identified as being 3-story development as part of that outline application. So that's included for you to say that yes, there are 3-story apartment blocks proposed as part of this scheme, but there are also 3-story apartments approved as part of the previous, albeit now expired, outline planning permission. In terms of highway safety and access and car parking arrangements, I've included the detailed consultation response of the Highway Authority for you at Appendix 2 to address the various issues that are raised in respect of that aspect of the proposal. And you can see at paragraph 7.51, based on that assessment and those negotiations that have been undertaken throughout the lifespan of the application to date, no objections to those aspects of the proposal are raised, subject to the conditions recommended by the Highway Authority. I mentioned in my introduction the public rights of way, and you can see at the plan at 7.52 where the route of the public right of way is shown in the dotted line, and you can see how it very just about clips the bottom right hand corner of the site. And as I said in the introduction, condition 37 has been agreed with the public rights of way team to ensure that that public right of way is maintained through that part of the site by actually just clipping back that portion of the hedge back in a manageable way and to be maintained as such thereafter. Other matters are considered in terms of the design, layout and appearance of the site. With your officer's opinion, set out at 7.57 and 7.58. Other matters are raised regarding the number of consultations that were undertaken, and hopefully you'll agree that we have done extensive consultation as well as press and site notices for this application. And concerns were also raised that this might be an opportunity to introduce a traveller's site onto the site. Say no, that is not the intention. The scheme before you is exactly as described and illustrated on the submitted plans, and any proposal for a travel site would need a separate application accordingly. The final aspect of the application relates to planning obligations, because you'll see from the consultation responses, we have received requests for contributions from Highway Authority colleagues, Education Authority colleagues, as well as the Clinical Care Commissioning Group. And those figures are set out for you within sections 762 onwards of the report. I would draw members' attention to paragraph 7.63 of the report, where it clearly says, according to our developer contributions SPD, we do not seek contributions from affordable housing schemes. But notwithstanding that, the applicant has undertaken a viability assessment of the scheme, which, as you can read from the report, which we've had independently assessed, and it is confirmed on behalf of the local planning authority, indeed, that this scheme would not be viable to make any of the contributions sought. And as such, together with the outcome of that viability assessment and our own developer contributions SPD, no contributions are being sought as a result of the proposed development. So the heads of terms that are attached as Appendix 1 relate to securing the affordable housing provision, a small traffic regulations order contribution, as well as the provision, management and maintenance of on-site public open space. So I can bring the presentation to a close at this stage by saying, for the reasons set out in the report and as summarised at section 8, the proposal is considered to be a sustainable form of development when assessed against the development plan as a whole, and subject to the conditions set out in the late paper report. The application is recommended to you for approval, subject to the completion of the Section 106 agreement with the heads of terms set out at Appendix 1, with further minor changes to the conditions, namely the raft of plans and consideration of limited development rights. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. We'll now go to public representation. We have 3 speakers and the ward member to speak. And to start, Mr. Saunders, presenting St. Peter's Parish. You'll be given the nod at 4.5 minutes, so you can wind up. So your time will commence now. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. David Saunders, Parish Councillor at St. Peter's and Vice Chair of the Conservation Areas Panel of Worcester. I think the initial feeling by the Parish Council, taking on board the report we just heard, of the suitability of this site for housing development at all, mainly from reasons of access and safety. It's an isolated site, the A38 on the western side, the dual carriageway on the northwestern side, pedestrian access, particularly for younger members, younger children and teenagers from there, would appear to be risky at best. We were concerned about the availability or lack of availability of affordable, reliable public transport in and out of the city from this site. Worcester's public transport at best is patchy and expensive. And where on earth is the 92 additional cars going to get into Worcester on the basis that the Bath Road is already very busy and one bus stopping will jam up the whole thing. I think we're also concerned about the pollution levels and noise levels mainly regarding the dual carriageway and the roundabout, where heavy vehicles are gearing down and accelerating away again. Pollution levels, I think, would be a problem, and noise levels, in spite of the figures given in the report, I think, would be also a problem, as the 3.5–4 metre bund indicated on the cross sections would protect the immediate dwellings behind it, but not the rest of the site. I think if you look at the way acoustics work. I think we're also concerned generally that although building the houses is one issue, building additional school places or hospital and GP services are already overstretched before the COVID issues made that even worse. Public transport, I think, is a huge problem. We were concerned about the effect on what is effectively a semi-rural environment on Taylor's Lane and beyond that, get down towards Norton and Kempsey. And we were not impressed by the quality of the architectural design either. And that's true of both the parish council's review and as vice chair of the Conservation Areas panel. I think there is little imagination or initiative been shown in the development of the housing designs, which sadly is not a rare occurrence. So we'd like to see a bit more well, we don't really want to see the housing there at all. The 3-storey units have raised the most objections from the residents of St. Peter's. And I think you will see, I don't know how many, I did lost count of the individual residents, as well as the parish council summary by the clerk of the council issued to those 3-storey buildings in particular. And I think that's about the summary, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions from members? Right. I'll ask Mr. Hannon and Mr. Bennett to the table, please. I understand Mr. Bennett's going to talk first. He represents RCA Regeneration, and then Mr. Hannon, who represents the Housing Association. Same rules will apply, 2.5 minutes apiece, or 5 minutes in total, and you'll get a nod at 4.5. Thank you.
Good morning, members, ladies and gentlemen. I don't wish to repeat your officer's excellent report, but I will just touch on a few brief points and I'll pass over to David. This is on, sorry. Oh, it is. We do appreciate the concerns of the parish and some neighbouring residents in terms of the building heights. And the site's been described as a sort of a semi-rural edge. However, this isn't the case. The site forms part of a 2,500 home urban extension. We must view it in this context. In addition, the principle of development of 3-storey buildings has been set by the outline, which contained more than 20 3-storey buildings, including an apartment building adjacent to the highway, which didn't provide an earth fund with the site. Members will also no doubt be aware of the taller St. Modwen commercial development already under construction, and there are more commercial buildings on their way, built closer to the highway edge. In addition, the northern elevation of the apartments, which weren't shown on the presentation, I don't believe, but they're designed to take the appearance of a 2.5-storey building. So actually the view from St. Peter's, where views are possible, typically from the carriageway, will be of a 2.5-storey building rather than a 3-storey building. The 3-storey elevations on the south of the site, visible from within the development. In addition, there is the planted bund, which does provide screening, and we have done noise modelling to demonstrate this. It also provides air quality improvements. It'll be planted, and as the planting grows and develops, it'll only provide more screening in time. We also note the highways related comments, but highways have worked meticulously on this application. We've spent an extensive amount of time. We thank them for their efforts. And it's come to the point where they have no objection to the development. The development contains an electric vehicle car club, which is beneficial for the tenants of the scheme, who will be able to access electric vehicles in a relatively affordable manner. Charging points are provided across the development, together with a new footpath along the A38, together with a pedestrian crossing with a central refuge to allow access to the bus stops on either side of the carriageway. Nevertheless, as an affordable housing site on an allocated site for development, it contains allotments, it contains a play area, an orchard, together with a raft of sustainability measures which results in SAP A ratings to all properties. There are 10 bungalows that are clearly more accessible, together with the ground floor apartments, which have, in respect to the bungalows, manageable courtyard areas that would appeal to sort of older tenants as well. We'd like to thank officers for their collaboration. It's what I believe to be a fantastic development that will contribute significantly to the city's affordable housing needs. And we therefore agree with your officer's assessment this application should be treated favourably. That's on to David.
Thank you. Our board would delight. Oh, I pressed the button. By magic, it came on. On behalf of our board, we're delighted to present this opportunity to yourselves as one of your strategic partners. The site, as has been explained, will deliver 92 affordable homes. That's the business we're in, providing affordable housing. Homes that were built to our, what we call our rooftop living home standard. That is a standard that exceeds building regulations across ecology, environment, energy, and a range of other measures to ensure we have a sustainable development. The project has been designed to have a mixed community in terms of age, profile, income, and lifestyle. And in addition to that, we have received full support of Homes England through their New Ways of Working funding programme. So I present this to you, as my colleague Joe said, we would welcome a planning commission, a positive planning commission. Thank you. Thank you for that. Short and sweet. Members, questions for the applicant? Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to know, based on the Conservation Advisory Panel meeting, which was a significant time ago, so I'm surprised the papers are only with us as late papers, but that aside, they've got quite a lot to say about the application, and they seem to be thinking that it's not really worthy. Have you had any discussions to change the plan since you've seen that report to try and make it a better application?
Well, we've employed an excellent heritage consultant at Orion, and they sort of fully have endorsed the development. I do sort of appreciate concerns. If there's any particular specific concerns that I might address, I'd be happy to take any specific questions on that. But we do consider the site to be a sort of fantastic opportunity to provide affordable housing in a highly sustainable manner. The development site has been granted planning permission before for a similar number of units, and I think when viewed in this context, it is one that should be approved. Sorry.
Obviously, some of the the devil's in the detail in quite a lot of this, and you're talking about allotments and orchards, but the site does have boggy patches, and having an allotment on a bog is not much use to people. So how will you ensure that those areas are going to be fit for those purposes?
Yeah, well, the allotments can contain raised beds, so therefore we can provide high quality soil in terms of raised bed provision, and therefore the planting that would be provided and as part of the development in terms of the landscaping, but also the vegetables and whatever else that would be grown. I don't think there'd be any significant issues in that regard. I don't know if you want to.
I'll just come back. I mean, allotments have been in decline, and one of our corporate strategies is to introduce allotments. And this is something we have done in Whithaven District on similar areas of land, using the methods that my colleague Joe's explained with raised beds and ensuring that there is suitable soil for people to grow their plants and whatever they want to do in their sheds. Councillor Bissett.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about education, and I nearly asked the gentleman from the parish council, but I wasn't sure who to ask, so you're getting it. And the question is, where will small children go to school? And to get to school, they have to cross those busy roads.
I'm not 100% sure in terms of what new school provision is going to be provided within the urban extension, but I do understand that there will be further education sort of buildings within the urban extension. For now, there is obviously Cherry Orchard Primary School. I am aware that they're only running 2 classes in reception this year, so I do believe there is capacity for them. At present, there is the pedestrian refuge and crossing that would allow access over the A38, and then there will be an active travel corridor that connects Kemsey and Worcester that will come forward in time. I think perhaps what is quite important, I guess, to bear in mind is that the site is part of the wider urban extension, which will develop a substantial amount of improvements in time. So while we consider the development to be acceptable in its current form, and it can sustain itself quite happily, in time, there will be improvements. The plan that Alan referred to is taken from that Welbeck development. There'll be a footway on the southern side of Taylor's Lane, which will allow connection into the over to the new pedestrian bridge, which connects through to I believe Power Park, and then beyond St Peter's and any sort of nursery and other facilities that we provided as part of the urban extension. So it is very much the early stages, but we can't wait forever for Welbeck to come forward, and therefore we consider the site to support itself in the early years.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a supplementary? So in the interim, we're anticipating that residents of this development, if it's approved, will walk away from the city to get to the pedestrian crossing, to get over the A38, to then follow the new pathways over the Carrington Bridge. Is there any provision for a temporary access up to the pedestrian bridge that already exists?
We would be happy to explore options to achieve that. The slight issue that we've got is that whilst Rooftop do own the neighbouring site, there is then a brook, which means that it's not easy necessarily to get into the St Modwyn development and therefore access the pedestrian bridge. Whilst people could, in theory, walk along Taylor's Lane, I appreciate that members might not consider that suitable for all. I personally wouldn't necessarily have an issue with the speed limit is going to be reduced to 30 miles an hour. But yeah, in time, the improvements will come. Obviously, the pedestrian footpath does go slightly to the south before obviously crossing and then continuing north into the city centre. But equally, the footpath is provided in that direction in order to provide access to the existing bus stops that provide access in a northern and southern direction, so that people could easily get onto the bus and go south into Kemsey, where clearly there are further primary schools and obviously nurseries and the like.
Any other questions from members?
Yeah, no, it's just a clarified point that Councillor Bissett raised. As part of the urban extension, there is a proposal for a 2-form entry primary school that would come forward as part of that.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. I have one more question. Do you know what the relative heights of the bund on the A440 on your site is relative to the bund on the other side? Borders Power Park.
I'm not sure on the precise height of the St Peter's bund, because I know that further along the bund, it kind of becomes the height of walking. I've lived in St Peter's all my life, so I do know it quite well. But I think the design was intended to be fairly comparable. But I think 2.5 meters is probably ever so slightly taller in part, and obviously it will be planned to provide that extra screening in terms of noise and air pollution that will develop in time.
Thank you. Are we done with the applicant, ladies and gentlemen? Lucy.
I'm not sure if you can answer it or Mr. Coleman, but am I to understand that actually you're making no contribution to the 106 money?
Yeah, that's correct. So in the developer contribution SPD, affordable housing doesn't provide contributions. We acknowledge that this is part of an urban extension and went to the sort of the extra time and expense to go through that financial viability appraisal. to demonstrate that the site couldn't provide contributions in that regard. However, the provision of affordable housing, 100% affordable housing, is a contribution in itself, which there is a shortfall in Worcester as set out in the officer's report. There's also a shortfall in the urban extension itself, which in the 106 is only providing 20%. Members will obviously be familiar that 40% is a typical standard which isn't being provided, and the development will go some way to mitigating that.
So there's no provision for schools or highways or anything.
That's correct. The development won't directly fund those services that will come forward.
Right.
Are we content? Thank you, gentlemen. Now call forward Councillor Mackay, who's the ward member.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I say, first of all, you've already addressed one of the issues that I was going to take concern about in relation to the crossing, so I can reduce my comments perhaps a little in relation to that. So thank you. Well, thank you for allowing me to address you on this matter of the development of the 92 homes at the southernmost point of the city's administrative area. I make a point of describing that location as it sits at a crossroads of the main trunk route into Worcester City, namely the A38. As I know you're aware, we advertise Worcester as a heritage city, tourist destination. We encourage visitors to come here, not only our Worcestershire residents, but from counties much further away. Many will use the A38 as their approach road and will have come through a particularly pleasing route to get there via Kempsey. Having done so, they will then have to negotiate the Ketch roundabout to travel into the city itself. And of course, there is generally a queue to do so. And so their first impression of Worcester will be waiting by a large roundabout next to a housing development. And of course, I appreciate that there are many types of developments in Worcester where travellers to the city will see homes being built and such like, but this one is different. Because what those visitors will be sat next to and see are 7 large 3-storey brick buildings, as can be seen in the drawings that I handed out earlier on to you. I would like to describe them differently, but I have seen the plans and I would like you all to consider them as well. I appreciate that the aesthetics of developments are an individual matter, but in this instance, I cannot see how anyone could form a different opinion in that I only see featureless blocks. Taking it further, within your papers are minutes of the meeting of the Conservation Advisory Panel of the 4th of November 2020, who described them as uninspiring in design, reminiscent of former council housing, and need much greater consideration. And they also speak of the housing having external wood boarding, which is being left to weather. And we've seen in Lowesmore in the city the results of that. So there's also the consideration of what they would look like as time goes by. So that is a first impression on entering our heritage city. And on leaving, you can see the northern elevation. That's the second one I've
Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to commence. Members, apologies for the failure in the technology. If it fails again, we're probably going to continue the meeting, but without the benefit of technology. So, yeah, the broadcast is still working, it's just the visuals. So back to you, Steve.
Right, thank you, Chair. Try again. I take it you don't want me to start from the beginning. Okay, so I mean, where I got to was effectively saying that those blocks of flats will be the first and last impressions of visitors using that route in and out of the city. You will also have seen the number of letters from local people that was on the website, and I'm quite cognizant of the fact that the numbers of objectors do not mean an automatic refusal of the development by the committee. However, their thoughts do merit serious consideration. And you've heard a number of them from the parish councillor, Mr. Saunders. But I wanted to speak about those visiting Worcester as new visitors first, to highlight how planning is about upholding the wider public interest for the benefit of the whole community. And that is to say, for the benefit of Worcester City residents and not just individual constituents or particular interests within St. Peter's. If we want Worcester to thrive, we have to make it an attractive entity. By designing pleasing buildings, they will merit and produce positive comments, which are so important if we wish to push the idea of economic sustainability. That is opposed to visitors telling friends and family that the entrance to the city is dominated by bland and dull buildings. Item 12 of the National Planning Policy Framework document states the creation of high quality, beautiful and sustainable buildings and places is fundamental to what the planning and development process should achieve. Good design is a key aspect of sustainable development, creates better places in which to live and work, and helps make development acceptable to communities. It goes further to say that planning policies and decisions should ensure that developments will function well and add to the overall quality of the area, not just for the short term, but over the lifetime of the development. And also are visually attractive as a result of good architecture, layout, and appropriate and effective landscaping. And then at para 143 of that same document, it suggests that development that is not well designed should be refused. I believe that when the SWDP came into existence, there was an understanding of a green area being retained at the edge of the city. Well, this appears to be no longer the case with the development here, but even if that is the case, I question the need for such large buildings in the form of 3-storey apartment blocks on what has been a semi-rural location. Could there not be a more conducive housing design that would be more in keeping with the area? Certainly these apartments are incongruous to the ward of St. Peter's, and particularly as they are by the side of a major trunk route and within the view of the established residences. At para 756 of your report, the writer, when referring to the comments of local residents, states, however, I note that there is considerable objection to the proposed apartment blocks. As noted above, the inclusion of 3-storey development was previously found to be acceptable by the Planning Committee in respect of the outline application. That was P14 LO266, and that was in 2014. They go on to say it is acknowledged that these would be greater in height, scale and massing to development in the vicinity of the site. In this respect, the northern elevation of the apartments that would be most visible from Broomhall Way, St. Peter's, have been designed to take the appearance of a 2.5-storey building in order to mitigate their impact. Well, I think we've been advised that these apartments are in fact 11.5 meters in height. I would point out that in 2014, on that application that was permitted, included 3-storey buildings, but they were set to the eastern edge of the field, and that was well away, well before the Southern Link Road was shaped, but was considered appropriate away from the road. As I said previously, Mr. Saunders has spoken of the reasons for objections by residents of St. Peter's, but I do wish to take up a little of your time in respect of one of those concerns, and that is the issue of noise for those who may move there in the future. The papers you have inform us of how measures will be required to mitigate the noise from adjacent roads. Well, there are none better to inform us of how the noise of the Southern Link Road has affected them than the residents themselves. To protect those living in homes near to the northern edge of the Link Road, an earth bund was built. The same thing is proposed for the homes to be developed in the Ketch Field. So the question is, does it work? with the suggestion that the 7 block buildings are big enough to assist in also preventing noise being passed through to those homes in the middle of the development. However, those same homes will suffer the noise of the traffic that emanates from their north, where the Southern Link Road sits. Within the papers before you is a noise assessment that was undertaken, and to quote from it, that measurement was some 16 metres from the A4440 and 10 metres from the A38. Both day and night measurements indicated that the site would be at medium risk for noise, for which the guidance indicates the site is likely to be less suitable from a noise perspective, and any subsequent application may be refused unless a good acoustic design process is followed and is demonstrated, which confirms how the adverse impact of noise will be mitigated and
Councillor
minimised.
Mackay, we've hit time, so if you could just wrap up, that would be great.
I'm sorry, I was
Oh,
told
sorry.
that I didn't
10
have time.
minutes. Sorry, forgive me.
Okay. But during the night time, where were we? How the adverse impact of the noise will be mitigated and minimised, and how that noise impact will be avoided. But during the night time, the site adjacent to the A4440 had its noise exposure increased to high risk, indicating that there is likely to be an increased risk for refusal, but again could be mitigated by good acoustic design. So we know in advance that there's a problem. Excuse me. Residents nearest to the bund on the Southern Link Road will and have given clear answers, both in the objections they have mounted regarding this development, and certainly over the past few years through my email inbox. The Southern Link Road is a fast road and it's noisy. By its design, it was meant to move traffic quickly from east to west and vice versa. When travelling from the east at the point nearest the homes, it's slowing to accommodate the roundabout. But on the other side, not far away, the traffic's accelerating. The residents that have been affected by the noise in St. Peter's that are allegedly protected by the bund are further away than those will be in the proposed development. Noise is a great pollutant, one of the worst, be it dogs barking, noisy neighbours or traffic. And in this instance, with 3 lanes of it moving towards the proposed development and 2 going away, those providing the acoustic protection have to get it right. And I would suggest that these earth bunds are not as effective as the science may suggest, possibly even with fencing. But of course, the solution is only as good as the information that the problem solvers have. And it's possible that the information may be slightly incorrect or even possibly slightly misleading. The noise assessment was taken on the 18th and 19th of March, 2020. Now, I accept there is some debate about where we went into lockdown last year, but I would point out that Matt Hancock has stated the official lockdown date was the 16th of March, when he told the House of Commons that all social contact should cease. So having been told that, you will know the effect on our cities, towns and road network. They fell silent. The assessment took place 2 days after that announcement, so the results may not be a true reflection of the noise that we now experience there. It is possible that the risk to residents from noise could be far greater than that recorded over those 2 days. And remember, you'll recall I said they were in the medium and high risk. Knowing how I do as ward member the effects of the noise on the Southern Link Road on local residents, I do believe that it is imperative that this committee place considerable weight on this matter. I don't intend to repeat the other matters raised by Mr. Saunders, those of access to the site, safety issues, limitations of public transport, but I hope that the 2 main items that I've addressed will give an understanding of why I believe the development should not go ahead in its present form. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay.
Chair, thank you. And Steve, thank you. And I do appreciate all of your concerns. I just, thinking about Worcester holistically as a whole, obviously I live on the north side in Claines, and there I would argue that we had the most beautiful approach to the city. You could swing off the A449 round right, you would turn left, or down the left-hand side, we would have daffodils in the spring, fields to the left and the right, a beautiful black and white period property, and that will carry you forward into the city with 20s and 30s style housing. We lost that due to a development approved a few years ago by this committee. You know, drive in, and on the right hand side you have a lot of large homes which look completely out of keeping. So I feel as though unfortunately we've lost the ability to have nice approaches to our city. I feel as though they've gone, but I absolutely understand where you're coming from, just to make that comment.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair, if I may reply. You say large home, were they apartment blocks?
Are they large, 2 and 3 story executive homes, a mix? Yeah.
Further questions for the councillor? No, none. Thank you. We now go into general debate and further questions. Members?
How's that? Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether you want questions at this stage or comments, but if you don't mind, I'll make a comment and questions might come from that. I can see that the objections that run through this are concerns about noise and pollution on the site. I've got to say that I think that condition 18 in the late papers, if they don't nail it, they get thinking close to nailing it. And it's certainly a very serious consideration of those who are going to look at matters after a decision has been made. The other thing that impresses me is that unlike some recent applications, this is in accordance with the development plan. So it definitely crosses the first hurdle. And then it comes down to other things. We want to provide housing, affordable housing. So what reason would we not want to do that? Well, those who are on the planning, I'm looking over at Pat and a few others, those who are on the planning for some years have been were blessed with training from 2 people that used to come down and insist every time that planning, design and aesthetics were no matter for the planning committee. We could rely on architects to do that. And they would always do the best they possibly could for their reputation. And then these characters would disappear off to where they lived in the Derbyshire peakland, no doubt protected by a conservation area. And we've had some pretty wretched buildings on occasions. I won't cite them, but we've had some pretty wretched buildings. And when I look at the ones that are offered now, we've got some lovely people living in houses that were at places like this that were built in the 1950s after a war in an emergency, and they were great, but we're not in the 1950s. And if you wanted to design something that nailed people down and said social mobility is not for you, deprivation's for you, that's what you design, I think. I mean, they're pretty wretched, to be honest, the 3-story things. So I really am quite bothered about that. But is it a material planning consideration for us? I make the point that I think these are wretched, but I don't think it's a material planning consideration. Now, whether there's, going beyond, whether there's a need for this city council to think in a different way, and have we've got excellent planners and they do what we ask them to do, but whether we need somebody else to be, because it doesn't have to be like this. If you go to Norwich, you go to York, there's some fantastic examples of sustainable housing that are affordable. We could do it, but we don't do it because it's not been our rationale. You know, you just stick them up and fill them in. So that's not a planning consideration. The other thing that bothers me is we're getting a £13,000 contribution for a £1.6 million need for infrastructure. Okay, that's great. It sticks to the rules, but who does it affect? It affects the people of St. Peter's, because they're using the same facility, but they're not going to get the money from the development. They're going to get 13,000. Well, that might provide a nice, robust fence around the allotments, but it ain't going to help with the local health and it ain't going to help with the local education. So I worry about that. Is that a material planning consideration? No, it isn't, because it's within the rules. So where I'm struggling, because I don't like this design. I don't like the fact that it's being planted on the side of an existing settlement, and it may be to the detriment of that. But I can't see a material planning reason to refuse it. Thank you, Chair. Sorry for taking so long, but I struggle through it.
Yeah, no, I think I should just confirm for Councillor Roberts and the rest of the planning committee that design is indeed very much a material planning consideration. There have been very recently changes to the National Planning Policy Framework to reflect the introduction of the National Design Code. So design is very much high on the government's agenda to be reflected within planning decisions as a material consideration.
No, I'm aware of these changes, and more changes to come. I think they're going to introduce beauty as a concept, but I don't see it in the papers. I don't see it as being a consideration in the papers.
I mean, I guess the question is, does this conform to the latest standards?
When you talk about latest standards, it is the development plan and our SPD. Now, design, as you'll appreciate, is very much a very subjective topic. So what one person may find beautiful, another person may find ugly. So I'm not going to stand here and say this is the most beautiful thing in the world. But I do appreciate the concerns about the design.
Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Roberts, you and I have been on this committee a very long time. It's true, on and off anyway. Well, certainly more on than off in my case. This development already has outline planning permission. It's allocated in the South Worcestershire Development Plan. So we know in one form or another it's going ahead. I think we know that much. What we have to do here is decide whether or not the detail of that is suitable. So with that in mind, I'd like to applaud the amount of socially rented housing we're going to get here and affordable housing. We desperately need that, as we all know. So it'll be a massive social contribution to the city and to the people, the residents in particular, who are on that waiting list, waiting for those houses. There is an ecological management plan, and we haven't seen many of those yet. So I'm very pleased to see it, and the detail of that. I won't go into it because it's all in your papers. There are two real issues of concern, I think, for me. I note that Taylor's Lane has speed reduced to 30 miles an hour. I really think it would be better at 20 miles an hour. It's very, very narrow. And I do take issue with the highways service about the crossing of the A38. It's proposed that the crossing will be a refuge. I think it needs a signalised crossing, and I'm very sure of that. The reason is it's an extremely busy road, and there will be children and young people crossing it as well as elderly people. And my experience of children and young people is they often go around in groups. They're not going to fit on that refuge. I think they need a signalised crossing to stay safe. So I would urge highways to think again about that. I know we can't tell them to, but I urge them to very seriously think about that again. The other thing, I think, there are two things that residents have mentioned. Can I be clear? There is no traveller's site planned for this site. I don't know where the rumour started, but it's not planned for this site. So that's not going to happen. The other thing is the relationship to St. Peter's. Now, the level of the ground on this development is quite a bit lower than St. Peter's. There's also a bunt, and I'm going to ask Mr. Coleman to remind us of the height of the bunt in a moment. And also there will be a screen of trees planted on it. Obviously, tree planting has to be seasonal, so we may not see that exactly when we want to. It may be November the following year, but that's what's planned. And I think the total height will screen quite a lot of this development if you add it to the lower ground level. So I think a lot of fears about the view being spoiled. Yes, there will be an impact, but I hope that what they will see is a screen of beautiful trees. That's pretty much it for the moment. I sort of leave the floor to other councillors and their concerns.
Thank you. Could I just add to the issue about the pedestrian crossing and perhaps ask Highways on a comment on that? And when do we anticipate Taylor's Lane being stocked up, which would make a significant difference, I believe?
Thank you, Chairman. There's been some discussion clearly about the uncontrolled crossing of the A38. Now, the provision of this uncontrolled crossing has been subject to consultation with our road safety team. And our road safety team, they are trained safety auditors, have deemed that it is appropriate given the number of vehicles that are on the A38 and the speed of those vehicles. The refuge will be in accordance with the appropriate design standards, and they have deemed that acceptable. As you've heard first of all from Mr. Coleman, the nature of Taylor's Lane will change significantly as the wider allocated site comes forward. And at that point, residents from this development will probably choose to use Taylor's Lane and then access the newly constructed Broomhall Way Bridge. I can't give you timescales of when that's going to happen. It's my understanding that the Welbeck part of the South West Ribbon extension still doesn't technically have planning consent because the Section 106 agreement hasn't been signed. So I don't know when they're anticipating starting on site. Apologies, I don't know whether we're talking, several years before that's going to come forward. But of course, as part of that as well, there will be a signalised crossing of the A38 linked to that development, although I note it is south of this development. So whether you would expect people from here to travel south to then travel north, but we anticipate that at that point they will be using the Broomhall Way Bridge.
Well, it's not ideal, is it? There you go. I did ask Mr. Coleman if he could tell us what height the bund was and how high he anticipated the screen of trees.
It's set out in your late paper that the bund is proposed to be 2.5 metres tall, and from the landscape plans that you've seen on the presentation, there would also be tree planting adjacent to that bund, and as those trees mature, they would exceed 2.5 metres in height, depending upon species.
Thank you for that. Perhaps I could ask another related question. Can we ask for the report on noise to actually be repeated now that we're hopefully somewhat closer to normal, to see whether that impacts on the need for a higher bund? Is the first question. And the second question is, can we confirm that it will be mature planting on the bund? Because certainly it took a number of years for the bund that was delivered on the St. Peter's side to mature and become effective in terms of noise, light and pollution.
Taking those points in reverse order, we can ask for semi-mature stock sizes of trees. Obviously, you can't plant mature trees straight away, so you have to be wary of that. It probably would be reasonable for a further noise assessment to be undertaken. You could perhaps secure that by a condition to inform the mitigation measures that have already been recommended. And obviously I would like, to discuss that with the applicants accordingly.
Questions? Jenny, and then
Thank you, Chair. Like other people, I do welcome the affordable housing that is suggested in this. Do we do equality impact assessments on these sort of schemes? Because taking a pram or a wheelchair along a lane, I'm not sure how practical that is, especially if there's traffic going along it. So I don't really understand how all that fits in, especially as there are no shops or other provisions on site. So people will have to leave their homes and travel by whatever form it is to get to facilities. Presumably the closest would be in the middle of St. Peter's. but that's quite a tortuous route by the sound of it. The other thing really is that, no, it's stuck out in the middle of nowhere, but it is a gateway into the city. And the design isn't really saying, wow, we're a fantastic city. And there's no reason why affordable housing can't be exciting. So I'd really like to see something a bit more imaginative. We've got imaginative buildings elsewhere in the city, and I think it'd be a really good opportunity to put something more positive in, especially as the conservation panel have said that it's really uninspired, the design. They've said reminiscent of former council housing, and I can see that because it's big blocks without any kind of real features that make you think, oh, that's interesting. I know where I am in the country because Worcester's the place that's got these type of things rather than bog standard buildings. So I'd like to see a lot more go into the creation of that centre space and place on the edge of the city, and not just being a dumping ground.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to make many of the same points that Jenny has just made, so I won't make them again. I'd just like to add, first of all, that with regard to the affordable housing, I do welcome the affordable housing naturally, but it is regrettable that the types of affordable housing included don't include social housing. So this site doesn't address in a way, perhaps most serious need that we have for people who are really struggling with issues of poverty. I'm concerned about the 3-storey buildings being next to the road, even with the bund and the planting. And I was very interested to see that the previous planning application also had 3-storey buildings, but they were situated to the eastern side of the site, and they would, in time, once the next development has been built, be right in the middle, and therefore less, less obtrusive. So, and I very much take on board the comments of the conservation panel about the layout. I think there'll be a tendency for the green spaces, the allotments, the orchards to feel on the periphery, and it would be much better to have those in the centre of the design. So at the moment, at least, I'm inclined not to support this application.
Mel?
Chair, thank you. Yeah, I won't echo a lot of the comments already said, because I do agree with the majority, but I just think in the interim, while we're waiting for further development, could highways not make an exception and make the crossing a refuge, a safer crossing? And could we just do something with the design if we must have the 3-storey, just so then that's all. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hodgson?
Thank you. I too have real worries about the design of this application, and yes, it's within the SWDP, and it's allocated for housing, but surely we can design something, particularly the 3-storey buildings, a bit more special, really. Just because it's social housing, it doesn't mean that it can be, it doesn't relate to good design. I also have a real, and all right, it's because of the other developments at the moment, it's very much isolated, and also we do have the residents have to go a long way to the schools, the other shops and that sort of thing. All right, other applications and things will come in, but it's still a bit disturbing. Thank you.
Councillor Cleary.
Thanks, Chair. It's a question for highways. When the road widening works are finished, do we know by what percentage that's going to increase traffic flow along the road?
I can't apologies. I can't give you specific numbers. That is something that I can provide after the meeting. But the purpose of the Southern Link Road is to deal, the dualling of the Southern Link Road is to deal with the congestion, the existing congestion. When we did all of the work and went through the planning application, it wasn't deemed to induce too many additional trips. It just dealt with the additional trips that were currently using it, able to travel without congestion, without queuing, without the journey time delays. So the work that we did, and apologies that I can't remember the numbers, it didn't show that it increased traffic significantly. It just managed the journey times of that traffic. But I can get the information that was provided as part of the planning application. It was submitted to county. I can do that for you and forward that.
My concern is with people crossing the road. That road already looks dangerous to me if you tried to cross it. Now, obviously, there's going to be mechanisms put in place to make it easier to cross, but I would like to know what the level of traffic is going to be when the road widening is finished. So if you can provide that, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, if I could just come back on that. I mean, if we're talking about the A38, the road, the widening works which are taking place on the A000 Southern Link Road, they do not increase any of the traffic on the A38. So the traffic on the A38 will be as it is today. Except, of course, there are developments coming forward and traffic growth occurs. But as I've said, the uncontrolled crossing has been deemed acceptable. It's got a pedestrian refuge, so you won't have to cross the road in one go. I know the area very well. I live in Kemsey, so I cross the A38 regularly. And as I said, we have deemed it acceptable. I note the comment from both, I believe it's Councillor Barnes and Councillor Agar, for us to consider putting in a formal signalised crossing. I mean, as we have deemed an uncontrolled crossing acceptable, it would only be for the developer to offer a signalised crossing and a design for us to consider. We haven't asked for it because we haven't deemed it necessary.
So in some respects, even if you get the information, it's not going to be a great deal of that. Alan.
Yeah, just a couple of points of clarification regarding the affordable housing that Councillor Bissett raised. That the tenure mix is set out in paragraph 3.4 of the report. So there would be 59 units for affordable rent and 33 units for shared ownership. So that is the tenure mix on that. And just really a very quick comment on the wider point regarding, accessibility to shops and services. Clearly, this is part of an urban extension. Applications for reserve matters have been approved on adjacent sites which are within Malvern Hills district. However, strange that seems, that's just the way the administrative boundary goes. This is the first application following the expiration of the outline permission within Worcester City, but very much we do work very closely together and cognizant of the fact that at some point the whole development is not going to be implemented all together. Someone's got to go first, so there will be these initial problems, perhaps in the same way that when St Peter's was first developed, in the same way then Warndon Villages was first developed. The point perhaps I'm trying to make is there is provision, as I mentioned before, for a two-form entry primary school as part of the urban extension and a local neighbourhood centre for shops as well as GP surgery. So as the scheme does get developed out, it will be self-sustaining in that respect, but in the interim period, clearly there will be a reliance to access on more local existing services and facilities. I just hope that clarifies those points for members.
Back to the affordable housing. There's 3 types of affordable housing, and this development only includes 2 of them. Yes, 59 units are for affordable rent, but even affordable rent is too much for some people, and that particular group of people are not catered for by this development. I take the point about the teething problems of living in a new development are exactly that, and that eventually they will come to an end.
Thank you. Can I just ask Mr. Coleman, can you use your best endeavours to try and, through your contacts with the other developers, at least potentially provide some sort of temporary access so that we could actually have a pedestrian access that takes you towards the pedestrian bridge into St. Peter's rather than away from it down towards Kemsey? I appreciate we can't enforce that, but if we actually make endeavours to say, will you allow temporary access, that would be helpful.
And I imagine the residents of the adjacent sites will be seeking the same thing as well. So yes.
Any more questions? I noticed, but we haven't had a proposal. Councillor Ditton.
Thank you, Chair. I thought that some of the, I mean, you asked the last question that I wanted to ask. That's one thing that I'm particularly concerned. I mean, obviously I welcome 92, it could be 102, still be maybe needed, and we go a long way to supporting that. But I have some concerns of the people who are living there currently. I know Alan's talk about a bigger picture. This is a part of the smaller, sort of larger development, but I still need to sort of ask the highway, I'm afraid, as part of it, is that if the widening road, where it could, if you can see page 25, that shows I think that shows quite clearly this development anyway, not to, but the only access is into A38 and Taylor's Lane by vehicle. And I want to sort of create about the bicycle entrance and disability access, and also the pedestrian access to St. Peter's. There's a shop, you know, Tesco's or whatever, that facility is needed. And rather than they drive round, there should be a facility that's allocated or widen the space. I don't know. When's until the development goes, it could be 5 years or 6 years, it could be, and those people residents in that particular, when they're living there, will be suffering. So is there any way that we could include that with this application? Thank you.
I think the request that Councillor Johnson has just asked Alan to liaise with the developers of the adjacent site covers that point, if I'm understanding you. And in terms of the road widening, apologies, I understood your question to be in relation to the dualling of the Southern Link that's going on. You're referring to road widening and the planning. Are you referring to the widening of Taylor's Lane? Because there is, as part of this application, the developer is widening the first section of Taylor's Lane so that it's comfortable for 2 vehicles to pass, and then obviously safe for cyclists. There will be a footway provided, so residents will not be walking in the road. We won't be walking in the lane. There will be a footway provided for them to then cross the A38. But I think in terms of the connection to St. Peter's, that is exactly what Councillor Johnson has asked Mr. Coleman to do, I think.
Forgive me, Chair, if I can come back to that. The access shows, well, the vehicle access on the A38 and Taylor's Lane, but the red line on Taylor's Lane, is that the bit that's being expanded, are you saying, or extended?
Apologies, you said the plan on page 25. I mean, that plan on page 25 is the previous permission. That's not this planning application. That's the planning, I was going to say extant planning permission, but it's the one that's expired.
Yeah, I think the page 6 and 7. Page 6 shows the current proposed layout, and page 7 is are the proposed access arrangements via Taylor's Lane.
And just to Alan, maybe you can answer the cycle lane and the entrance to that again. I refer to page 25. That there's an entrance to the old application, or if you want it, which was part of going to the next, can we have a temporary access to that or not? For bicycles or pedestrians?
Okay, two things. Page 25 was the outline planning application that was granted by the planning committee but has now expired. The only similarities between those two are in terms of the actual red line boundary of the site. The chairman has asked if I can coordinate some temporary pedestrian access, certainly to the Broomhall Way Bridge, which I'm happy to try and facilitate. In an ideal world, all the local shops and services proposed on the urban extension would be there already, and we could facilitate pedestrian access. But of course, we don't know that those services don't come online until a certain proportion of the residential development has been provided. So it's important that there would be at least pedestrian access to existing services within St Peter's, and I am again happy to have that conversation to achieve that.
Thank you. Any more questions? There being none, I'm looking for a proposal.
Thank you, Chair. I'll propose. May I just add one slight caveat? I mean, we have cleared up a lot of the points, I think, that people were worried about here. But normally we leave our design issues as reserved matters for the good judgment of our officers. And I would ask our officers to look again at the cladding, perhaps. It is large, and we've seen larch go black in this city. It's not the best solution. Of course, we wouldn't want any greenfeld cladding either, but I'm sure we're all aware of that one. So I'd like to propose it, please. I'd like to propose the approval.
I missed your eye when I wanted to ask a question, and it's this. I understand the proposal is what's before us. It seems to me that all the genuine and very real concerns have been addressed, to be frank, and except the fundamental and the design of the building. Is there any room to be minded to approve and ask for further work to be done on design features?
We have the recommendation before you, so that would be as set out for you. The only option that you would have would be to defer consideration of the application to allow for those negotiations on aspects of the design and perhaps layout, as certain members have alluded to. I've also the updated noise impact assessment. So that would be the option to you, because once you're minded to approve, it's the scheme as set out in front of you, and then it would be more difficult for me to work against that.
In the scale of things, would that have a big negative impact on anyone?
Certainly in terms of the deliverability and the availability of Homes England funding. I know it's a very tight timetable at the moment. However, the applicant and the agent are in the room. So we have got a Section 106 agreement that would need to be signed. Through you, Chair, we could seek further amendments to the design, and that perhaps could be secured through a condition, notwithstanding any details, amendments to the design shall be submitted to, but it's whether or not that comes back to this committee, and I'll leave that to the discretion of the chairman.
I can, Chair. The thing is, what I don't want to do is do a bit of shroud waving and make a noise and everything carries on as normal. That's why it's an experience thing I'm asking. So I mean, I would like to see any mechanism there is to readdress this concern of design, which is an aesthetics, which it seems to me is the only one we haven't cracked.
Through you, Chair, thank you. I think the the issue with the design, if you are unhappy with design, notwithstanding any motion being put forward at the moment, but if you are unhappy with the design, you may consider actually wanting to get the application deferred to, as Alan said, to allow those negotiations to take place, and then you can bring it back to committee to allow you to review that, because I think that would be the safest way of dealing with this, to allow you to consider it, I would suggest. And at the same time, it would also allow the issue of materials to be picked up, which was raised by Councillor Agar in terms of materials, and also the question of the timing of the acoustic survey, and allowing that to be reviewed to whether or not there's been a material change in the movement of vehicles, which will feed into that and maybe result in more mitigation being required.
To withdraw the proposal on those terms. So proposed deferral in that case.
So the proposal is that we defer this. So subject to further consultation and discussion, it would come back to the committee. I'm happy to second that. All those in favour? Thank you. Councillor
wanted-
Barnes.
In that state, as we're looking at a fairly broad brush approach in a way, that where the play area is within the buildings could also be looked at. It's right on one side at the moment, and allotments and the orchards, I'm quite happy about that. But having a play space quite a way away from the blocks of flats and so forth, this is about child safety, really, so, and maybe that could be looked at in a different way.
Yeah. Thank you. Right, we move on. Next item is item 6, County Cricket Ground, New Road. And I think there's a late paper as well, isn't there?
Okay, yes, thank you very much, Chair. There is indeed a late paper on this particular item, and that addresses the issue regarding the head wall and the permitting requirements to achieve that. And I would also add to that that I think there probably also needs to be 2 additional conditions that would address, first of all, landscaping scheme for the site, but also a pre-commencement condition for the local planning authority to have details of the head wall arrangements themselves, just for the avoidance of any doubt. Other than that, it is a relatively straightforward application for the resurfacing of an existing area of the site that is used for car parking. So it's not the use of the site that is concerning us, it is the actual resurfacing. And I don't really want to dwell too much on that aspect, but we can go through the slide so we can actually give you an idea of what the existing layout of the site is. And it's really just to bring, to upgrade the site so it functions better as a car parking area. So you can see the red line, so it's adjacent to the Riverside Walk alongside the hotel car park. And the next slides actually illustrate, that's not the site, but that's adjacent area of car parking, but the relationship with the boundary of the site to the Riverside Walk. The next slide, please. And again, just further afield, and that's just to give you an idea of the type of surfacing that we'll be looking at. Next slide, please. So that's a clearer photograph of the site. So it's an unmade surface at the moment. Next slide, please. But again, it would maintain the same relationship, and that's the type of permeable surfacing that would be looking at, that would need to be served by a head wall arrangement for the drainage of surface water beneath the surface. Next slide. So that's probably the best idea. You know, that is the area parking at the moment, and so it would be sought to be upgraded. And next slide, please. Again, further through the fence. Next slide, please. And next. And next. So you've got a mix of car parking treatments, of your traditional tarmac and more of your block paving. And next slide, please. Next slide. And next, please. And that's the view of the site from the Riverside Walk itself. And next slide, a different view. If we can keep going, that's it, we can end on that one. So that's effectively the proposal, so that we were actually upgrading the surfacing treatment rather than keeping it as an unmade surface. To all intents and purposes, we are happy with that proposal. It would be permeable. It would require drainage, which would be disposed of into the River Severn by that head wall arrangement, which is required by separate environmental permitting. But other than that, and subject to the conditions that I alluded to at the outset regarding landscaping, to maintain that relationship with the Riverside Walk and the actual detail of the head wall arrangement, we are happy to recommend this application to you for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. Could you show on the map exactly where the head wall is going to be and give us an indication of what it might look like if it's visible at all once it's been put in?
The head wall would, well, it would, I don't know if I can talk at the same time. The head wall arrangement, it would be within this vicinity of the site here. I can't give you a precise location at this stage, and hence the condition regarding the head wall. We'd like to see details of that, but it won't be a huge feature. It's just a small outlet pipe with the relevant surfacing within the actual bank itself. So it wouldn't be a very incongruous feature, but still we'd like to maintain some control on that.
So it would go under the path into the river.
Go on to the next slide if you can. So there we go. That's the route and to the head wall feature there. So this picks up all the underground surfacing to pick up any surface water that drains through the permeable surface. And it all collects at this point and then discharges the river via that route. So you can see it won't be a very large feature at all, but we just like some control over the external appearance itself.
Like a one-way valve or something like that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Chair. Rather belatedly, under declarations of interest, I was an employee part-time of Worcester County Cricket Club 5 years ago. I don't know how relevant that is, but I feel that I should actually have it noted at this point. I don't know whether it debars me from voting or not. Thank you.
For that, and I don't think it would bar you from voting.
Thank you, Councillor Amos. It isn't a current vote, so as long as a current interest, as long as you're satisfied you can approach the issues with an open mind, then there's no bar to you carrying on.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bissett.
Going back to the drainage, will the construction of this pipe and outlet involve, detract from the riverside at all, or even, and if it's temporary, will everything be, will the river bank look just the same as before to users of the path?
Your officers don't consider it would detract from the character appearance of the riverside, and we would obviously very much want to minimise any visual impact. And there are other headwall features on either side of the riverside as you walk along, particularly in connection with, for example, one by the Diggers Hotel and also the actual Diggers Basin development. They are very, very discreet and can be integrated well within the riverside. And over time, there will be, they will be concealed further by natural vegetation.
Thanks, Chair. It seems a very proportionate application, and I noticed that it takes into account biodiversity and actually includes a new hedge. So I think it's perfectly reasonable, and I move acceptance in accordance with the papers provided.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Anybody happy to second? Thank you, Councillor Barnes. The motion is to approve. All those in favour? Thank you. That's approved. We move on to on my papers. Item 7, land at Sheriff Street.
Thank you very much, Chair. There is no presentation for this item. As you can see, it's a very short report for effectively a very simple request for a deed of variation to an existing Section 106 agreement relating to the development of the Sheriff Street Industrial Estate. As with a lot of development proposals these days, there are viability issues, and effectively that has meant that the developer has requested a deed of variation to reduce the level of contribution that's currently required by the existing Section 106 agreement to 2.63 million, and also a reduction in the level of affordable housing from 30% to 10%. As you can see from the report, we have had the viability appraisal independently assessed, and the position of the applicant has been confirmed that that would be the maximum level of contribution and level of affordable housing that could be secured from the development. Now, mention is also made within the report that there would be the ability to provide Homes England funding for, I think, some 212 affordable housing units, but that would have to be outside the realms of any planning obligation. In itself, that's all very well and good, but that is not a material to the request for the deed of variation here. I think I just need to center members' minds on not to be swayed by, oh, we could get more. Fingers crossed, we hope that will happen, but effectively what we're asking you to say is please agree to the deed of variation to reduce the level of contributions and the level of affordable housing as set out. It's not an ideal position, but the viability to support that case has been independently assessed and verified. And as a local planning authority, we are happy to support the deed of variation on that basis. I don't think I can really add much more to it at that stage, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Questions, comments? I think the reality is we're between a rock and a hard place. Councillor Barnes.
This is the second variation. How many variations are they going to give us? No, 30% down to 10% on affordable housing. 4.8 million down to 2.6 million and contribution. Very disappointing, and they've had a lot of time to start building and they haven't. So my gut reaction was no, they shouldn't be allowed to keep on chipping away at the 106 agreement. And certainly if it does go through today, it should be on the understanding that enough is enough, because no, we've made an agreement with them. They've come back once and we've agreed to that. They're coming back again and reneging on a lot more of the original arrangement. No, I understand that they may be a bit short of cash at the moment, but to be frank, that isn't our problem. And I am very unhappy that it's come to this.
I understand your frustration. Mr. Coleman?
Yeah, again, it's never very nice when you have a major urban regeneration project that, you know, did come through and it was making the full contribution and the full level of affordable housing. But one cannot ignore the economic realities of the viability of development. We have, and I think the applicant will probably agree, that we have tested them quite severely going through the viability appraisal, because we are acutely aware of the impact. And as you can see from the report, there has been agreement between Education and Highway Authority colleagues. The Education Authority are happy to forego their contribution or their proportion of the contribution to enable the regeneration of the site, and the Highway Authority also are willing to accept a reduced contribution. And I suppose the acid test is, do we want this site to be left undeveloped, or do we want to see the development come forward? In saying that, we are seeking a clawback or deferred contingency obligation. So if there is any uplift in the profitability or the viability of the site, that is shared, and that would be both in terms of the level of affordable housing as well as in the level of contribution, obviously subject to the cap that it won't exceed the policy requirement. So yeah, we share the frustrations, but I think as we've said, we are between a rock and a hard place, but I think personally I would rather see the development come forward with something rather than nothing.
Councillor Roberts?
Yeah, Alan's just said it. Paragraph 4.4 talks about the education highways, and the point they make is they don't want to stagnate urban generation, which is exactly what I was concerned about in the other paper. But on that basis, I move the recommendation as put in 5.1.
Councillor Hodgson, before we move.
I just would like reassurance that if the market does recover, perhaps the application might like to grow their 106 money in future. So perhaps that could be a drawback. I'm sorry, I was wanting to reply a lot sooner, so apologies if other people have answered the question.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's precisely the reason why we have got the deferred contingency obligation within the deferred arrangement, so that any uplift in viability would be captured.
Can I just ask, I mean, I understand they could come back again if needs be, but when does the actual planning permission for this run out? Because presumably they are time limited.
That would be July 2023.
Thank you. Councillor Bissett.
Could I just ask about this affordable housing? In other words, what kind of affordable housing is it that's being reduced, that they're asking to reduce from 30% to 10%?
I think if I could refer you to paragraph 4.3 of the report, we've recommended social rented housing as well as shared ownership and rent to buy units.
Okay, yes, I missed that. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a proposal from Councillor Roberts. Happy?
I don't know what it is.
It's as drafted on the paper. Right?
Sorry?
Basically, I'm saying that we go with the recommendation as put out in the paper.
Councillor,
Can I just ask a question? Rather than going down from 30 to 10%, why don't we ask them to meet us in the middle at 20?
Believe you me, we've tried to, we've tried to say, can you meet us at 29%, 28%, 7%? That's why, yeah, that's why we've done the viability, say what is the maximum that this scheme, you know, could, and it has to be said, it's not just the local planning authority conceding on the level of affordable housing to get to this 10% and the 2.63 million contribution. The applicant has also taken a reduction in the profit level that he himself expected to return from this scheme as well. So that's below the industry norm as well.
thank you. So we have a recommendation as drafted on page 55.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second. I think there's some tough negotiating has been done, and this is probably the best we're going to get. Given that we've got a clawback position, I think it's the right thing to do is minded to approve.
Chair, can I just raise one point in clarification? Because George is on Zoom, so she's been in touch with me remotely, just to say it's just a point of clarification really before you go to the vote, that it's her understanding that the permission expires in December 2021. So it's not a big, but I just thought I'd share that.
Thank you for that. So they've got to move pretty quickly before the planning falls apart. We've got a proposal, we've got a seconder. Those in favour?
Sorry, can you just put your hands up for those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? You vote? Oh. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. We now move to item 8, the land at Everard Close. And at this point, we intend to consider a matter which is private and confidential. So the proposal is that the committee goes into exempt session Thank you. We now return to open session. Questions, comments, having received and discussed the legal advice. Okay. Councillor Barnes.
The hours of operation are vastly reduced under what is suggested nowadays. Certainly 9 o'clock at night was not appropriate for a built-up area of family homes. 6 o'clock and no action on Sunday is less unacceptable. However, I'm still a bit concerned about the noise levels and however it's created. At the moment, we don't know whether the doors are going to be open to this building while whatever it is happens in there. Can we condition that the doors are kept generally shut to reduce noise levels?
You can, but that would probably entail the enforcement officer being posted outside the site, you know, throughout the hours of operation to make sure the doors aren't open, which is not feasible. So from that point of view, I don't think it would be reasonable from that perspective. Condition 3 does ask for details of soundproofing and a noise management plan. Well, as part of that noise management plan, it may include that doors will be kept shut at all times. It might also be worthwhile adding to condition 3 details of any ventilation, external plant and equipment to help, because if you are keeping the door shut, you may need some natural ventilation, just as you would perhaps if you were just tinkering around in your own garage. So I think that might be something members might want to consider perhaps as part of condition 3, but we are seeking details of soundproofing and a noise management plan.
Can I just seek clarification on this question of the hours? It presumably, because I noticed a discrepancy between paragraph 3.5, where we say that we've introduced the hours of operation to 8 AM to 6 PM Mondays to Fridays, and 9 to 1 PM on Saturdays. And that compared to condition 3 talks about hours of 800 to 2100. So presumably that means that after 6 o'clock they can stay open, but they mustn't actually do anything. They could be talking or something like that. Or should those hours be the same?
I believe they are the same, isn't it? 0800 to 1800, so 8 AM to 6 PM, Mondays to Friday, which is both in the paragraph 3.5 on the condition, which is condition 4, 9 AM to 1 PM, so 0900 to 1300. Nothing at all on Sundays or bank holidays. So forgive me, I don't think I think they are.
I think you need to be on page 62. You look at, you're on page 62.
Oh gosh, yes, of course. Sorry. I'm so sorry for wasting your time.
No, it's fine. It's useful to clarify.
Councillor Amos.
Yeah, here we go again. There's nothing to stop on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday the person renting these premises from accessing them, whether they're actually working or not, or accessing them, is a fine dividing line. So I think if it's a one-man or just a two-man or two-person business, then they will be there at odd times of the day, just possibly just accessing or tidying up or clearing up, but not necessarily working. So what's the definition of working? Again, we've got the inconvenience to the residents who are going to have to put up with this. And I come back to, again, enforcement. As Mr. Coleman rightly said, there are certain elements of operation that you would have to have the enforcement officer standing outside the door 24 hours a day to actually enforce it. So it's not going to happen. You know, it's just not going to happen. We must give deference, as I said earlier, to the residents of this area. This is not a suitable development. It is one development too far. And I reiterate the point that I made earlier in closed session, that we don't know what we're voting for. We don't know, we have no idea of what's going to come, or what's going to be there, how it's going to operate, and what its impact is. We are voting at the moment for the unknown. It is not suitable. I cannot support this proposition. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your comments. I understand what you're saying, but I don't think we can at this point say it is unsuitable. All we can say is we have concerns if an unsuitable business actually takes possession or occupation. And regrettably, that's not part of this planning application. It's about, can I develop this unit for this very wide range of potential users? And it's only when we get an actual user that the issue of are they creating a nuisance or not comes into play.
I withdraw the word unsuitable in that case then. I just express my deepest concerns, and those concerns are shared by Councillor Mitchell in his last dissertation, and I supported his concerns in my presentation at the last meeting, and I'm also expressing those concerns once again at this meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Cleary.
I was just going to say that every objection I had when this came around last time still stands, and I can't see that any objections can be overturned. Everything we talked about before is still there. All the potential problems, all the potential objections, and the only thing that seems to have changed is the legal advice. But I'm still going to object to it.
I guess the issue is it's all about potential, and what the legislation is about is what actually happens, not what potentially might happen. And certainly the officer's recommendation that this is a lawful application and maybe a wholly suitable occupant, but we're not judging the occupant.
I feel really uncomfortable with voting for something that we don't know who's going to be there, we don't know what it's going to be, we don't know when they're going to be there. I'm baffled as to how we can even vote on this.
I do understand the concern, and I completely get it, and it doesn't make our job any easier to do, you know, that full and proper assessment. And we would only be able to, you know, give the fullness of advice and guidance when we do have a proposed operator in place. But perhaps if it helps, perhaps it's no different if we were looking for a change of use, perhaps within the city centre for premises to a restaurant. You may not know who the end user is, so you would put controls in place regarding hours of operation, disposal of refuse and waste, noise management plans, etc. And a restaurant operator moves in. That's great. That's perfectly valid. If that restaurant operator then starts becoming a takeaway, that's when the breach of planning control takes place. That's where we intervene. So it is perfectly permissible for us to allow uses without necessarily knowing who or what the end operator is. As we are acutely aware of the issues, and Class E, as we've said in both reports, does allow certain activities within a residential area. It's quite clear what the measurements of that suitability within a residential area are, and we have sought to mitigate those particular issues: noise, dirt, dust, means, pollution, through conditions. And that's probably as far as we can go under the terms of this application.
I've made it clear that I'm not happy about this, but I'm going to go back to something I said the last time we talked about this. The distance from the opposers' back door, this place, is half the distance from my house to my fence. And I'm not happy with this at all.
Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I empathise with a lot of what's been said. I didn't like this application myself. But that said, I appreciate the legal position all too clearly. And I also appreciate that I don't like the government's policy on use classes. And I don't think any of us do. And that's probably what we're struggling most with. So I'd urge us all to have a go at the MP and say, can you get this changed? Because we're having trouble making decisions in our planning. Because I think we're struggling with this one. It's not what we would like, it's far from ideal. But as Mr. Amos and Mr. Coleman has just said, we can condition this through a management plan. So what do we want to see in the management plan? I mean, I'd suggest on health and safety grounds, as Councillor Jenny Barnes has said, we at least want to see something to do with ventilation. We want to see something to do with noise attenuation, don't we? At the very least. Is there anything else?
Thank you, Pat. Are you content, Alan, to put that into the conditions?
The conditioners drafted asks for full details of refuse storage and collection details in a refuse management plan. It asks for details of soundproofing and a noise management plan. And I did allude earlier on to whether or not members wanting to include details of ventilation, external plant and equipment. I'm satisfied that that would address the main issues. And it's in a perverse sort of way, if you're asking for a noise management plan, for example, and you're anticipating noise, then it suggests to me that anyone that wants to come in and produce a noise management plan would not fall within the meaning of Class E.
Does anybody want to recommend a motion? And I would reluctantly second that, but we're between a rock and a hard place, and I don't think we've got anywhere to go but to approve. We're between a rock and a hard place, and I would second Pat's recommendation.
Proposed with extreme reluctance, because I do empathise with what you say, but I think our quarrel is with government policy.
So unless there are any other comments or questions, we'll go to the vote to approve.
For because of planning law, I see no alternative. Thank you.
For with a heavy heart.
Equally heavy-hearted for.
Pardon, sorry, that's 6 for approval, 3 against and 1 abstention. There's only 10 members today. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Yes, that's carried, sorry, Chair.
Yeah, the motion is carried. I don't believe there's any other business. Thank you for your attendance, and we'll see you next time.